There you go.
All right, good morning, everyone. It's 9:33, so we're going to go ahead and get this meeting started. I'm going to call the November, thank God it is November, TAC meeting to order. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Golden for roll call and determination form.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Allis, for getting the gavel out. Jamie Jackson,
Here.
Here.
Alexander Osia,
Here.
Matthew Mahane,
Here.
Paul Anhillo,
Here.
Rodney White,
Here.
Mohammed Benamar, Nick Miner,
Here.
Mike Fincham, Ivan Rucker, Amy Garbarini, Michelle Shropshire,
Here.
Stephen Hayes,
Here.
Bob Schneider.
Here. Online.
Great, Bob. Great. Christine Hoffner, Nick Ruiz,
Here.
Greg Reed, Sharon Sullivan, Kate Gibson. You have a quorum, Madam Chair.
May I just ask, is there anybody else online that we didn't hear from other than Bob? Someone like Amy Garbarini or anybody else online? Okay, thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you. All right, we're going to action item, which number 3, which is an action item, which is the approval of the November 7th TAC agenda. Can I get a motion for approval of the agenda, or does anybody have any amendments?
This is just a question, like if I want to pull something off the consent, do I have to do that now, or does that wait until 6?
You can just go ahead and do it now as part of the agenda, so we're approving it.
I would just like to pull the 6D, the calendar off consent.
Okay, we can put that under, should we put it at the end? And 7, let's make it 7K.
Can we just do it like right after the rest of the consent? It'll just be quick.
Okay, we can move that. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
Okay, so we are removing item 7D from the consent agenda, but it will go in right afterwards, after we approve or review, and if there's no objections, approve that. Any other amendments to the agenda?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All right, all those in, any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, guys have it. All right, so we have pulled the calendar from the agenda, so we are going to have that discussion. Paul?
Okay, this is minor, but I just noticed on the calendar that basically George Washington's birthday, which is the state holiday, isn't shown on that calendar. Is that the meeting that would likely need to be shifted maybe to the following Monday?
Which date is that? Sorry, I'm not.
This is the February 20th date. And this is just another suggestion, like you have like in June, like the same date as the GWC board meeting, you might end up with that same situation in January and February since there are holidays on the third Monday. And that was it.
January as well.
Because of Martin Luther King Day.
January 23rd.
Yeah, the FAMPO date is fine, but GWC, I think, would be like on that same date. So you have like on June, you have like same date as GWC board meeting.
Oh, I see.
That would probably apply to January as well.
I get it. Okay.
Okay, great.
But we don't need to change the January date unless the RC. So, but you're suggesting we do need to change Monday, the 20th of February, which might affect the, no, it wouldn't affect the TAC necessarily.
It doesn't affect the TAC.
It just means that
policy.
that policy committee date needs to change.
But it is the George Washington Regional Commission. It's George Washington.
It's
down there.
They've got extra food for us.
Yeah.
Obviously, we just missed that when staff member
Not a
developed
big deal.
calendar. We'll fix it. Thank you.
Any other adjustments to the calendar? And that one will need to be approved by the board, correct?
Policy committee.
The policy committee. So we will.
Are we happy with the TAC
Yeah.
dates?
Does
That's
anybody have
that's what we.
Approved today is just the TAC calendar. Does anybody have any objections to the dates as printed for the TAC calendar only? We can approve the GWRC or the FAMPO meeting.
Just to confirm, there's no meeting in December.
TAC never, well, traditionally, FAMPO committees don't meet in December, and they used to not meet in August, but now the policy committee decided to switch that to July. So now the tradition is no meeting in December and no meeting in July, unless, the policy committee decides to change their mind about that, but that's where we are at the moment. So we meet 10 times a year, not 12.
Any other questions? All right, can I get a motion to approve the TAC calendar as printed?
Motion to approve?
Can I get a second, please?
Second.
That was Alex. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that moves forward.
Madam Chair, I don't believe there was a vote on the consent agenda, remaining items.
There was there not?
No, I did not.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
Right, because the agenda, item 3 was voted upon. And then we need to vote, I believe, on 6 ABC.
Yeah, we're not even there yet. So what we did was move the
Okay.
calendar out, so we
Right.
can address that one, so that, then we're going to the next of the agenda. Can you scroll down, please?
Connor, there we go.
Yeah, so we are not at the consent agenda yet. We are at item number 4, and that is you, Ian.
Great.
Okay. Connor, if you can click on the website and just click on the policy committee tab and click the policy committee agenda for the last meeting of last month. I will introduce Connor under staff reports as our new staff member. So he's in the hot seat, having just joined us. He's already running the computer. So just scroll down, please. So we had a public hearing on the TIP amendment. We also had a public hearing on the transit report at the last policy committee meeting. Scroll down, please. At this particular meeting, was at home with COVID, so I attended the meeting remotely, and I didn't do an administrator's report as a result. I just mentioned a couple of housekeeping items. The vision update, we took some of the proposed amendments from the TAC and we cleaned up the document and presented it to the policy committee. Didn't get really much feedback. Some people questioned kind of why do we need to do this, but there wasn't really much discussion there. Nobody raised any problems anyway or concerns. The funding opportunity, policy committee was not keen to do a letter of support, and so that item ultimately, after quite some back and forth discussion, fell away. And the deadline, policy committee basically said we need more information. We can't make a quick decision on something. We don't know this particular project at all. We don't want to rush into giving letters of support to people. We want to know whether other organizations were also bidding on this particular funding opportunity, etc. The applicants were still keen to come back with further information and ask for a letter of support, but honestly, the clock has run out. We've passed the deadline for them to submit their application, so FAMPA is not sending any letter of support.
If I may, just really quick on that, did they ever get back to you though with anything between, because the board did seem like, hey, if you had some additional information to share. Did they share anything else with you?
So the slide presentation that they did for the policy committee had an additional slide in with additional information. They emailed me later that night. I was already in bed to say, hey,
That's all we got.
can we chat to you to provide additional information? And when I got back they said, when you get back from COVID. So when I got back to the office, I contacted them, but you'll remember in the meeting, they said that their date to submit was quite soon. And so that date has passed.
And the reason why I want to bring that up, just in case anybody around the table gets any questions regarding that group, and that was the group with the zero emissions vehicles, comes back. I mean, we didn't have anything. We can at least say we don't have anything physically additional to support their project, because I don't want it to ever become an issue for this group. So.
Yes, that's true. I would say on top of that, that also we get often these applications at the last minute. They've already finished all the work and then they now want a letter of support and we don't know anything about it and we have to try and rush through our committees. And as you know, when you see something for the first time, you don't know these people, you don't know the project. Project sounded like a good project to me, but we had no relationship with them and they wanted a letter in like 2 weeks. And that always presents problems. Policy committee doesn't like approving things when they see it for the first time, if there's no background, if they don't know the history. So it is difficult. And when we get these requests in future, first thing I'm going to ask is, when is your deadline? Because if it's in 2 weeks, we can't help you. You need to give us like 2 months, because then we can help you. The East-West study, I just did a very short introduction to update the policy committee on where we are in the timeline. And then I presented the roadway modeling that shows where the congestion problems will be in 2050. So we went through all the locations that we asked the consultant to study, showed them to the policy committee, and said, we're doing this so that you don't get everything brand new, fresh for the first time on the roadway portion of the project at the meeting this month. So I gave them the preview of, here's where all the problems are, and the consultant is working to propose solutions to those problems. John then did an update on the freight summit, just to show that we did host the summit. Some freight companies did attend. We think it was a good event. And we're working on our surveys to get additional information from truck drivers and from company management for that summit. The resolution to approve the TIP amendment for the Fredericksburg train station for VRE/DRPT/VPRA was approved. It did go through, and that is now part of our TIP. And then there was some correspondence. Yeah, I think that's all.
Any questions for Mr. Ellis?
We did have, during the public comment period, 2 letters of support for the transit study, which I forwarded to, I think, everybody. So you should have seen the letters anyway.
All right, there's no questions for Mr. Ellis. We're going to move on to item number 5, which is the public comment period. So the comments and questions from members of the public are welcome at this time. Staff will also read comments submitted by the public prior to the meeting. And Mr. Connor, do we have any comments from the public?
I don't believe we have any new comments from the public.
Okay.
Since the last meeting.
Okay.
But if there's anybody online or anybody, I don't see anybody in the room, but if there's anybody on the line, we'll.
Are there any members of the public online at this time? All right. All right, if there are no members of the public online or in the room that would like to comment at this time, we're going to go ahead and move on to item number 6, which is the consent agenda. You've got the 3 items in front of you, and I did do that backwards, but yes, we've got the 3 items in front of you. We removed the item D, which was the committee meeting calendar, which we approved that piece with the TAC meeting dates alone. Does anybody have any questions before? I know we're going to go to discussion, but any other changes to items on the consent agenda or questions or clarifications? And if not, can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda, which are items A, B, and C?
Motion to approve.
All right, motion to approve from Paul. Can I get a second, please?
Second.
All right, got it from Nick. Thank you very much. All right, any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed? All right.
That's about it.
Carries. All right, we're going to move on to item number 7, which are action and discussion items. We've got quite a bit of things here, so if I do move it along too fast, just say Jamie, hold tight. But I'm going to try to make sure that we are efficient in moving forward on these items. So I will turn it over to Vita.
Connor, if you can click on those slides. Stephen and Eric, are you online?
Yes, good morning. This is Stephen. Can you hear me okay? Good morning.
We can hear you.
Yes,
Please
thanks
go
for
ahead.
having us. Thanks for having us again. We appreciate giving you an update on the work that's been ongoing. Just a little introduction with regards to the Safe Streets for All. Appreciate working with you, and I can appreciate Ian's comment that requests come in for letters of support at the last minute, and that was not the case for you all. But yeah, we had a busy period there in August and September. With, I believe, a handful of MPOs submitting requests for the safety action plans, and then 3 or 4 jurisdictions that we're aware of that submitted for actual infrastructure grants, saying that they had checked all the boxes on the self-certification requirements for a complete comprehensive action plan. So just to remind you about that a little bit, there's 3 required elements for that safety action plan before you can do any requests for infrastructure grants. The first being that it's less than 5 years old, which is no problem. Then a comprehensive list of projects and or strategies to be deployed with some sort of time period there, and then of course the safety analysis that we're going to get into that we intend to cover most of the requirements for that with our work with VHB. And then finally, there's so those 3 are the requirements that you'll need to follow on after our work with that comprehensive list. And hopefully you'll be successful with your grant to do that. And then 4 of the 6 additional elements, including leadership commitment and some sort of timeline towards 0 deaths and serious injuries, an oversight body. Hopefully that includes the 4 E's of safety, public engagement, some equity considerations, and possibly assessment of policy and progress tracking. So hopefully you can start to work towards adding on those other 4 of 6 that are required elements there to do your self-certification and move on to infrastructure grants. So with that, I'll turn it over to Eric, who's got an agenda on our progress to date and some next steps there. So go ahead, Eric.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to be with you guys again, along with my colleague, Sandy Snyder. I'm Eric Tang, VHB, here to provide an update on the analysis to date that we've conducted for the safety study. But first off, glad to see the clock get changed on the back wall there at the beginning of the meeting. Last time we spoke with you back in August, we gave you a timeline and structure to our analysis for this project. And after our presentation, Ian gave a background on the approach for FAMPO GWRC on how it was going to apply for the grant. And correct me if I'm wrong, Ian, all jurisdictions within the GWRC region were part of your application that was submitted by September 15th. And the approach that you took was to apply for enough grant funding to support the other elements, and that this VDOT data analysis was separated from that, so that you come into the grant in a more competitive position because you're only asking for what you need for the safety plan. Is that correct, Ian?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah.
We did not apply for $200,000. We only applied for 120, I believe, to complete the remainder of the project.
Right. So this is where we come in, through Stephen's grant to help this region develop its safety study data analysis. And based on the decision that was made back in August, originally Sammy and I were focusing the data analysis on the FAMPO region, but based on the resolution that this group passed, we conducted the analysis for the entire GWRC region, and we'll show you how we break down that information. So I guess, Connor, if you don't mind going to the next slide. Sorry, I haven't met you yet. But so if we go to the next slide, this is just to give you a sampling of some of the mapping, and we have additional maps to show. In fact, we have many maps that we've developed, but with the time that we have today, we're only showing a snippet of what we've been able to create. So the data analysis that we've conducted is based on available data from VDOT, from Stevens Shop, for the 5-year period between 2017 and 2021. And the focus on the statewide strategic highway safety plan is to really focus on the most severe crashes, so your fatal and serious injury crashes. That's also a paramount in the safe system approach that US DOT and other jurisdictions across the country and how they focus their crash analysis on the most most severe crashes. So what we've done here here at the regional level, we've shown you in the red dots the fatal crashes, of which there are 188 of them over a 5-year period. And then we have in the blue the serious injury crashes, of which there are 1231. You also see this shading in the background. That's just to foreshadow some of the work that we've done to account for the Health Opportunity Index, which is from the Virginia Department of Health, to show how there's a linkage between health outcomes and crash patterns. So we go to the next slide, Connor, please. So here we've summarized on this slide the number of crashes annually from 17 to 21. And we've also broken it down by the 5 jurisdictions, the 5 localities in this region. And it's broken down by here you can see what they call the CABCO scale, which is a crash severity scale. K being somebody who's been killed, A's being an incapacitating injury, B is a minor injury, C is a really minor injury, and O is your property damage crash. So we can see that breakdown across the 5 jurisdictions. And then we've also shown there at the bottom a row for FAMPO, which is for the 3 FAMPO jurisdictions, and then the very last row is all 5 combined. So I'm not going to belabor the point, just to show you that we have this information available, and that feeds into the mapping that we've developed for this study. If you scroll to the next slide, please. Thank you. So what you see now is not only do we have that gray shading in the background with the Health Opportunity Index, what we've also have developed here is what we call a high injury network. And what the high injury network is a subset of roadways in your region that is the location of a large share, if not the majority, of your fatal and serious injury crashes in the region. The idea is that if you're able to focus your resources on the most critical routes, you're going to be able to address, a large share of your fatal and serious injury crashes. So this is how we've been able to identify a subset. The idea is also to find complete routes where possible, so that you're not investing in hopscotch or a mismatch of different projects. If you're able to see complete corridors, why don't we just prioritize the entire corridor as for your TIP or through your smart scale projects, et cetera, et cetera. We are trying to help you identify those corridors of greatest importance from a safety perspective, so you can push it forward for further project prioritization. So this is these red lines are based on K, A, and B. We already mentioned fatal and serious injuries, Ks and As, but to help provide a larger data set, we've also included the B level injuries, just so that we have a more robust data set, just from a statistical perspective on informing our priorities. Next slide.
Before you move on to this slide,
Yeah.
with the Health Opportunity Index, is very low good or is very high the good one?
Oh, thank you for the question there, Ian. No, very low is the regions that are the census tracts, if you will, that have the greatest need. Lack of access to healthcare, poor transportation outcomes. There are 13 determinants behind that index that VDH has developed. So it all feeds into a composite score. And the very low census tracts are the ones that you want to prioritize toward. The other mapping that we have that is not included in the slides here is through the SS4A grant, the Safe Streets and Roads for All program from USDOT, they also identified a series of census tracts that meet 4 of 6 socioeconomic determinants of transportation disadvantage. USDOT wants applicants to focus their resources on those types of census tracts, and we have those layers available. So that is yet another way that we can overlay this high injury network on top of those USDOT census tracts to help you further prioritize your projects.
Next.
So let's go to the next slide. So what we have here is just a sampling of emphasis area mapping. In the Virginia SHSP, there are a whole series of emphasis areas that are identified. When it comes time to apply for projects from VDOT, they want localities to prioritize their projects under these emphasis area topics. So we've developed all these maps for each of the EAs, if you mind me calling them that. And we've also overlaid the fatal and serious injury crashes for those various emphasis areas. So this one is an example of occupant protection. So crashes resulting from a improper use of a restraint or lack of use of, and these are those dots representing those crashes. If we go to the next slide, Connor, you can see that these are the various emphasis areas in the state SHSP. You can see their roadway departure crashes, young drivers, seniors, bicyclists, pedestrians, motorcycles, speed-related crashes, occupant protection, and intersection, and impaired. And we have maps developed for every single emphasis area for each of the 5 localities in your region, as well as FAMPO, the 3 combined, as well as GWRC, the 5 jurisdictions combined. So you have a whole series of maps that are available to you. We've uploaded them onto a downloadable drive for you to review as well. As a bonus, as part of our analysis, for the safety study, we've taken a look at this, what we call a crosstab analysis, to show a relationship between emphasis areas. As you can imagine, a crash doesn't necessarily have a singular contributing factor, right? You can have somebody who's driving drunk, speeding, running off the road. You can name it, right? You could probably have a 7-dimensional analysis, but with the time and budget that we have, what we've done here is a 2-dimensional relationship analysis. So the way you read this is to look at the column level. So for example, we have this example at the bottom of the table there of all the roadway departure crashes. If you read downwards, 48% of the roadway departure crashes involve speed. And the way we've also color coded it to show a gradient. So if you read downwards on the column, the red cells are the most severe relationship, if you will, for that particular emphasis area. So this is just a way for you to see that relationship and how you could combine resources based on the relationship between different crash factors. If we go to the next slide, we also want to leverage the work that VDOT has performed with respect to the PSAP, the Pedestrian Safety Action Plan. In that effort, VDOT was able to prioritize a series of corridors throughout the Commonwealth with respect to the level of pedestrian bicyclist crash activity. So if we go to the next slide, this is an example of how the state's top 1% and 5% corridors are how they juxtapose against the roads in your region. And the purple magenta lines are those corridors identified in PSEP as being the top 1%, 99th percentile, right, of the corridors in the Commonwealth, and then the orange are the top 5%. So you can see there's more of a concentration of that in your urban areas in and around Fredericksburg, which is no surprise. You see this relationship with other areas that Sammy and I have analyzed through this project and prior projects. A previous regional safety study with Stephen focused on Richmond, the Richmond region, and the majority of these PSUP corridors were in the city of Richmond. If we go to the next slide, we've also developed mapping. If we just looked at the region itself, what are the top priority corridors? So those red segments are the top 1% for your region, and the green ones are the top 5% for the region. So if we took away Nova, took away Hampton Roads, et cetera, what if we just focused in the FAMPO GWRC region? These are the corridors that you would have from a percentile basis. And then if we go to the next slide, we also have, as part of the work for you, is developing a series of crash trees. Admittedly, a lot of the mapping that you saw earlier is based on a reactive crash analysis. Crashes have occurred, and we're reacting to them. The PSAP, what you saw moments earlier, helps to bring more of the proactive approach. Based on safety scoring and a systemic way of looking at things. The state was able to prioritize a series of corridors for safety investments. This crash tree tool helps bring about the systemic approach in a greater fashion for your region. What these crash trees do is to take a look at a series of crash characteristics, and if you're able to identify, let's say, a combination of roadway characteristics, whether it be the number of lanes, the speed limit, presence of a curve, if you're able to find a combination of factors, maybe you can isolate for segments within the region that may not necessarily have a crash yet, but because there have been a history of crashes with the particular characteristics, you're able to proactively identify locations where you can invest in safety and help address the critical need before the crash occurs. So if you go to the next slide, Connor, you'll see just samples of how a crash tree would work. So here, if we focus on the K8 crashes, don't worry about the numbers here. These are dummy variables. But if there are roads on the primary system, secondary system, et cetera, and then we further break it down by the access control, basically come up with a series of factors, you're able to isolate for a subset of crashes that seem to be overrepresented when you look at the overall universe of crashes. Maybe those are areas that you want to focus your proactive safety resources on. So then if we go 2 slides down, Connor, we just want to talk about next steps. We want to share with you all the mapping that Sammy and I have prepared. We want to continue developing the crash trees. We've had the Excel files set up. By the way, the Excel files that were used to develop the crash trees were developed by Federal Highway Administration. So we're just leveraging these tools that they've been able to provide users across the country with. And ultimately, in the new year, we will have a draft final report that documents everything in text format, of course, with a focus on the high injury networks, description of the health opportunity index. We'll talk about the US DOT underserved census tracts, show you the PSAP results that we showed you just moments earlier, give you access to crash trees. You'll be able to download those Excel files for each of the 5 jurisdictions, as well as FAMPO and GWRC independently. You'll be able to play around with crash trees and figure out which combinations of factors would be of interest to you, and have that tool for your use post-study here. And then also highlight those predominant crash factors in each locality. So I know there's a lot to digest there in this brief moment of time, but yeah, Sammy and I would be happy to answer any questions.
All right, any questions from the group?
Just one question. In terms of mapping and the data, will you guys be able to provide either ArcPro or I assume ArcMap maps that go along with it, or just the static PDF maps?
Oh, both.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you'll be able to access that. On top of that, Stevens VDOT shop, they're also making that available through ArcGIS Online. So you'll be able to, VDOT will be able to update their information also in real time. Excuse me. And you'll be able to access layers there too. So that's certainly an element at the end of the conclusion of the study that you'll have access to.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, any questions? All right, we are going to move on to item number B. And actually, you can just roll into all three right on because they're on you. And then afterwards, I would just, for the next presentations, I would just try to keep them to 10 to 15 minutes if at all possible, just to make sure we are on time relatively for this meeting. So I'll turn it over to you. So.
Okay, so we're providing a update on the funds available for the chief fund, so. VDOT, that's the old institution in there, VDOT on those. So first off, just reminding everybody, we have $2.6 million available for CMAQ in FY28. We're still waiting for our FY29 allotment that will be available in 2023. For STBG, we got 2.1 million for fiscal year 28, and of course 29 is still outstanding. But the bigger update was as far as what was kind of the leftover carryover from previous rounds. And from our understanding, this is all CMAQ funds from a couple of different projects. We have about 600,000 available previously, as well as 1.2 million made available from a DRPT project was, I guess, done, completed, or outside. Yes.
Hey, John, so like the sheet there says RSTP or like STPG for some of it, like is it really all CMAQ and nothing is RSTP or STBG?
I think the table's right. I think John misspoke the first time around. The DRPT project, however, Susan gave us those figures last week, but didn't clarify exactly which project. I was hoping she'd be here today, but she's not here. We're guessing that that's from the train station upgrade where the 5307 swap happened, but I was hoping to confirm that with VDOT this morning. But anyway, the figures are correct on the slide as far as we know.
All of that money is previous year money, so it'll be available to allocate and spend immediately.
We believe that it is projects that are closed out. The RPT one, I don't think is closed. The project is closed out. I think it's money that was allocated, but because the projects are due to commence in the next 3 years, I think it's from those 3 financial years that we're about to go into. So I guess it's fairly soon money in inverted commas. But again, we'd have to check with Susan to find out exactly which year that DRPT money falls into.
So just a question, like with the swap with 5307, I know there was like 500,000 approximately that was still possible to do to kind of use CMAQ, take the CMAQ off of that and put 5307 on that. Is this part of that, or is this kind of separate from that?
I think this is the first round, but again, Susan or perhaps Kate would have to give us that information. This, I believe, was the first round that was approved of 5307 to the VRE project station upgrades. And I believe that there was a further amount up for discussion. So I think that that is excluded from this number. I think this was money that was initially approved, which has now been given back to us.
Okay. So assuming nothing has been done with that, like, and this might be more of a K question, but like, is it still possible to explore that? Do you kind of swap with the 5307 and the CMAQ for the 500,000 on the VRE project? I think it was Brook.
Oh, to fund the remaining of the Brook.
Yes.
Yes, so we have received those funds are available, although I have to request a further breakdown of that number to know exactly. So I can work on that. Just need to loop back with the Cheaterski board on what that process is. But yes, there is.
Sounds good.
All right. Okay. Item.
Thanks, John.
Okay. Sorry, brain reworking. For item number C, we are still taking in information for any updated budgets for currently active projects. I think we have at least one jurisdiction that provided an input for updated funds. We are still requesting other jurisdictions to also provide an update on their active projects going in. Let's see.
Do you all understand what that means? I mean, I'm sure you do, but just
I would make it plain for
Yeah,
the group.
sorry.
Pretend we don't know.
Okay, so as we're looking out forward and trying to make sure that we are both spending our money as well as looking at the very real likelihood of cost increases, or if there's newfound money to make that available, we need to know about that because traditionally we have put a priority on existing projects for making sure that we complete those projects. So if it's an issue or an item where your current existing project needs more funding, we can basically tap the STBG projects funds before we do our project selection. So
we need to know from you whether your project costs have changed so that we know whether to consider that when we do funding allocations in the new year.
So I'll say this to the group. We know your project costs have changed. Some of you do not know what they are because you have not started your projects, and other of you do. If you are in the category of this is kind of the time over the next month or so to tell them. Because, for example, we're talking about funding that's available today. Not saying you go get the money, but I will say this is the opportunity to say, if you know that it costs more, for example, everybody around this table has a 2023 escalation engineering cost. Everybody around this table does. If you know it's more and it's going to be more, let's go ahead and have that discussion so we can make sure your project goes through fully funding. Because what we don't want is your elected officials, what they're going to do is say, well, how didn't you know that you needed more money? We got $189,000 in RSCP. We could try to help at least get you closer to whole as a group if that's what the group decided. So please just check your projects if you know you're moving forward with them. Now, if you're like some of us, not us, but I'm just going to say us, but it could be us, that, you just aren't going to start your project anytime soon, we're not talking to you. But if you know you're going to start your project soon, then let's address those projects first, is my opinion. So.
Thanks.
DDOT has made their statewide bid tabs available to all counties. Everybody should have received an email from somebody at DDOT telling you how to get access to that. If you haven't seen it, or if you email it to you, that's an excellent tool for estimating.
Thank you.
So I had one comment. We have one project, it's the Route 1 Market Street project for the VA. I know that, I believe the bid is coming for that soon.
It is going out advertisement tonight.
Okay. So that's, yeah. Okay. So that's one that maybe has the potential for some change. I guess when you have the information on that, can VDOT please send that to Spotsylvania and to FAMPO?
Right now. Getting this year's projects that go out.
Okay.
In about 30 days.
So maybe I guess all three then.
So I would say at this point, as Paul is just mentioning, so we're not gonna have a December meeting, we're gonna have one in January. By that time, at this point, and Paul, you're always on it, so Paul's always on it. Paul gonna get this money, so y'all need to, again, check your projects, because if not, Spots got it, because they're gonna have the information, and I'm not even gonna be funny, but if you've got the data, who's gonna hold you back from getting the projects, because you should have your bids back by then, so. Or at least have a good estimate. So, and it's gonna be more. I mean, Paul, Ronnie, you already know it's gonna be more.
So I guess to reinterpret all of that, word to the wise, get your projects in and get the details of your existing projects that need additional funding in, because we can't fund something we don't know about as FAMPO. And we do not have direct access electronically to your projects, right? We have to get them from the locality or from VDOT. We can't go in there and ourselves log in and check whether your project has changed in cost. John, next one.
Okay, so there was a request to add a STBG discussion about providing a set aside for of studies. I would actually kind of open this up to the group because FAMPO and Impulse have their own ideas, but there's a question of whether or not we should set aside, I think it was about 200,000 per jurisdiction of STBG funding, so that'll be slightly more than a quarter of our funding for studies. And I'll just allow that to be open up to the tables. There are kind of a couple of different options that the MPO can kind of take to approach this.
I'm going to turn this over to Alex just as to why you're bringing it to the group. I already know, but I will turn it over to you. And then if FAMPO has any recommendations, John, I'd ask that you present those, and then I'll open it up for the rest of the group discussion. So at least we know where the request came from. FAMPO, if you have any recommendations, the group as a whole can hear that, and then we can move forward with what we think it should be. So.
Sure. One thing, we've talked about here at Stafford, I guess, and some of our concern, we brought this up, was trying to understand, hey, what studies might be looking to undertake in FY, especially in the out years, 28 and 29, it's pretty far out to kind of set up a project now that we're going to do a study on and trying to get a cost together when we're not even going to start undertaking the study for another, 4 or 5 years or more. So wanted to see if explore with the group, if anyone else had any thoughts on that, setting aside money that we wouldn't really allocate at this time, but would allocate in the later years when we actually had the more study developed and we're ready to begin to work on that.
Another problem, which I'm jumping in, sorry, forgive me, but what Alex didn't say is it doesn't help for us to set aside money in FY29 for studies, because in FY29 you want to be funding the projects that you've already completed a study on. You kind of want to fund studies closer to now so that later on you can then fund the project that comes out of that. So, we're busy with studies, localities are busy with some studies, and then that's going to come to an end, right? In a year from now or so, those studies are going to be finished. And then what? No studies until FY29? So, I don't have a list of studies I want to fund necessarily. I'm just saying that we need to think about this timeline and how we deal with funding of studies. Because I would imagine you would want to fund studies in the nearer term and then fund the projects when you get there, right? It's no good kind of stuff all the money in projects now and then only start studies again in FY29.
Madam Chair. So I agree with Alex that with regards to kind of study funding, it's more helpful to have that kind of available in the near term, like I said, the next year or two. 28 or 29 is kind of too far out to do anything. So basically, that's the only money we have. It seems like we just kind of park it there and wait until it gets closer until we pursue funding. But I guess one of the questions I had with the STBG funding, and this might just be something we don't know at this point, is that I know I see that we have the 189,611, from kind of a closeout. But typically with, the census, and when you go to like a new kind of federal infrastructure bill, FAMPO gets a bump in its federal monies, and that happened 2013 to 2014 and 2003 to 2004. So you think like FY23 to 24, that's when it would happen. But have we heard anything at this point? Like, are the STBG and CMAQ funding numbers going to go up? And if that happened, then kind of like for all the years, it could go up. But where like in FY24, you suddenly have a couple 100,000 kind of manifesting itself in 25 and 26 and so forth. But we not know that information before March.
So the figures that you see there for FY28, those are an increase over the FY27. So it did go up, but not a huge amount. It went up by some modest percentage. I don't know if it was 7% or something. The assumption is that when we get the figures in March-ish, that the figures we have for 28, it's going to go up again for 29. However, we don't know by what amount or percentage, and there's been no comment from anybody. I don't know if VDOT has any further information, but we certainly at FAMPO don't. The other thing that is going to affect this, which I also don't know the year that it's going to kick in, is the new urbanized area sizes, if I can call it that, and the corresponding calculation to allocate funding, right? if our footprint and population and all those other figures that get used to calculate funding changes, we don't know how that's going to change the output of the formula. I think the formula is likely to stay the same, but your population numbers in the urbanized area will change, and we don't know yet what the implications are. There's no information coming to us from federal highways, for example, as to what's going to happen. We looked on the website last week, and the latest information from the Census Bureau is that all of that is going to be dumped on us in December. That's what we know, is that they've now revised their dates again, and December is the day when we're going to get the maps. Out of the blue, we're going to get all these maps in December. We then have to revise our, what is it called? Our study area, our urban, help me.
Urbanized area.
Urbanized area.
Yeah, well, but the FAMPO, it's not the TMA, it's the other thing. Anyway, all of those things may affect this amount of money. And I don't know when that kicks in. If they're only going to publish the maps in December, I doubt whether it's going to affect the FY29 money, because it's too soon for that process to happen, I would guess. But it probably will affect the following year, because by then you may have, now the maps are there, they're approved, they probably will implement them. Who knows though? There's lots of unknowns. In theory, because of the new Infrastructure Act, I would say that our annual allocation should grow, but that's very vague. I don't know if VDOT has any useful suggestions in that space, but we have no information other than your maps are going to arrive in December for the new urbanized areas. That's all we know.
All right, John, do you have any recommendations for the group? And then we'll go back to the committee discussion about what our options are. And from what I'm hearing from Paul, we could potentially delay that longer solution to later. But John.
So a common mechanism to allow NPOs to provide planning study funds is to flex the STBG funds before these go out for a call for projects. So it's basically a standing item where as we are made aware of our STBG funds, we basically park a given amount. And as that becomes available, so if we would have been parking kind of money and not flexing money previously, we would say, hey, we know we have, say, $200,000 coming up available. It's flexed into planning funds. And then what traditionally NPOs will do is to put a call for proposals from the member jurisdictions to apply for those funds. And that can be a yearly item. It's not necessarily we have to spend each year that amount of funds, but it will roll over. So if we're saying, okay, we don't want to do any planning funds this year, staff is too busy, there's no burning item that elected officials want, we can either put those into that planning funds back into the STBG pot, or if it's cost overruns or something else, but for that year it becomes short-term money. But if there is a desire to do a planning level studies, and we put out a call for projects each year based on flex STBG funds, that means every single year at a given time, localities could basically apply for planning funds to take on whatever project they kind of wish to do at that point in time. To kind of keep it, we don't want to be like flexing 25% of our STBG funds, but it's something that you flex maybe 10% or less. And you make that available in the call for projects, but at the same time, just to make sure that elected officials are kind of interested in these projects, NPOs can require a local match so that, whichever locality is coming to the table applying for funds, they're going to have to spend a little bit of their money in that local match to get that project funds. And therefore, each locality can put in an application, and we score those based on whatever criteria that, the NPO dictates there. This is what I'm saying, the board or the policy committee would dictate to us, it's just like a STBG item, and therefore we can have a rolling call for projects each year that's competitive, and we can also base our scoring slightly on kind of making sure that at least every, in this case, it'll be every 3 years a project could potentially become available for an entity. So if we just say we have $200,000 available this year, and you say Fredericksburg and Stafford both apply, one scores higher than the other one, then if, say, the one that did not get funded wants to go back into that pot, you can allow additional points there. So if it's a previously applied thing that folks want, we can still go in that direction. Now, with this competitive process, it also doesn't completely remove planning studies from being eligible for other STBG funds. So the big pot of money still exists in the background. So if we still have, let's say 10 planning studies that everybody wants, that can still be made available. But the right now immediate funds are a competitive process made year over year over year by flexing those STBG funds into planning funds. But the trick is you have to set it up. So if you've already spent all your STBG funds, well, it takes a while to eventually set up that process so that it's parked money for each call.
Yeah, so would transit agencies be able to apply kind of separate from localities, or would we have to go through the locality and where the studied improvement would be taking place?
I mean, ultimately, it's STBG money that we're flexing. So in theory, yes, but I don't know if that would be something that would have to be worked out in the process. I would say yes, because I'm aware that is, but normally I've also experienced that transit providers usually apply with the jurisdiction that they're operating within. So it's kind of we know you're working on this, we're in support of it, and therefore it's greenlit.
Because I'll say that would be a huge benefit to have that kind of, I wouldn't say dedicated, but a more predictable source of local study funds for VRE. And if there was the ability to double up, so for example, let's say we wanted to study some improvements at Spotsylvania Station and the county was also amenable, can you double dip? Can VRE put it in and the county put in, and then you've got double the amount of money for the study or something like that?
Yes. Even if, let's say, Fredericksburg and Stafford both want to do a project, sorry to keep picking on them, but they can even come in to do a cost share for the local match. So all of a sudden that project becomes much cheaper if they're crossing, jurisdictions, so that start splitting up.
Let's not get too deep in the weeds on some of those questions, because if we do that, we then need to have a little workshop. And I think that in this meeting, that might take a long time. I think that we need to just decide probably whether we do want to start putting a set aside in or not, and what the size of that set aside is, because we will need policy committee endorsement of that. We can then work out a system of scoring and all these details before let's say the January TAC meeting, where we can come with a proposal. But I don't want to hammer out every detail in this meeting. It will make this meeting very long.
Well, at a high level, just another question, I'm sorry, the scoring, it would be competitive. It would be very similar to what we had discussed last year, the prioritization of projects methodology that we spent some number of meetings working on, right? Would it be a complete departure from that?
So the existing methodology would remain. We may just need to do an amendment to explain that we're going to have an additional set aside for studies and how we would score that and allocate it.
Okay.
So ultimately you need an amendment. So I think we need a principal recommendation today. We can then, as FAMPO staff, work on a detailed proposal based on those principles and come back to you in January with something concrete. But I think we just need to, do we want to have a set aside, and what size set aside? And then I'll task John and staff to work on some details for you to consider in January.
So the comment I would have is I think we're open potentially to set aside, but it seems like based on the funding situation that there isn't sufficient STBG funding to do anything for FY28, barring some kind of change where money falls from the sky. So given that, do we have kind of more time to work this out, and we don't have to make a decision today?
I mean, my first take is that 189,000 that is lying there in STBG funds, we could just park that for studies and not allocate it on projects that you all are going to apply for. And I mean, the first principle I would suggest, and this is up for discussion, but my suggestion is every year when we have what I call leftover and remainder funds. If there's RSTP, it gets set aside first of all for studies the following cycle, following year allocation. And then if it's not all utilized, it goes back in the pot. So, I mean, that would be a first principle that I would suggest, that when every year there's going to be an RSTP remainder or leftover, or, you know, a project closed out and there's a bit left over. So we could take that amount. So this year it's 189,611 that we know about. Remember, this may change between now and March when we actually make the cash allocation, because Susan might come back to us and say, there's another project that's finished and there's another 50,000. I don't know. This always is a moving target until we get to March. We also don't know what the figures for STGB are. I mean, my suggestion is we say, yes, we want a set aside, and the first amount of set aside should come from leftover and remainder funds from projects that have closed out, to be topped up if necessary by STGB funds. If there is, you know, you could pick an amount, 400,000, you want the amount to be once a year. I don't know. I don't have an amount in mind. I'm just, you know.
So we can figure out an amount or a percentage, but does anyone have an issue with just the general concept of, we'll talk about the future, so of having a set aside available, not what it's going to consist of, but does anybody have any issue with that? And we can use Ian's as a framework. That doesn't mean we're going to go forward with it. It just means, does anybody have an issue with it, so we can hammer out that item.
So just a question, like if we did that, then like someone's applying for studies for this round, would only be like on that near-term figure. We're not basically applying for something in FY28 or FY29. And that money would just be parked there and would kind of gradually come forward and eventually be used when it's more near term.
You can still apply
all
for-
of these are questions, right? So, I mean, the point is that money that's left over, we can allocate now based on projects you apply for. Money that comes in the FY28 or FY29 funds, we can only allocate those in FY28, 29.
Right.
So that's what we can do. And that's how we can do it. The only difference is, as you know, having done this before, when you get to allocating the funding, sometimes you find these strange things where a project needs less money or more money, which is what we're asking everybody to confirm, so that we have to shunt money up and down. So it's possible that there could be another amount of money that is no longer needed on a project that is current or about to start, that we could allocate to studies. The frustrating thing about this whole process is that everything is a moving target until you nail it down in about March. So all these questions become theoretical questions until we actually have dollar amounts right at the end. And every time Susan gives us revised figures every 2 months until we get to that final allocation, and we have to revise that damn spreadsheet so many times before you actually approve it. So I can't make concrete predictions. But I think what you've said is the first principle. We should allocate leftover funds to studies that we have or know about. And for the rest, it'll have to be allocated in FY28 and 29 based on what we know today.
And it can be part of the regular cycle. So I can still apply for a study under my regular process. We're just talking about anything additional or setting aside specifically for studies. Because 95% of the time, your study is not going to be out anything else that got around the table that's a non-study. It's just not going to happen. So this is to try to make sure that these projects that need planning funds for it actually get them.
So my proposal is that today you decide whether A, you want to have set aside, and B, whether you want to say that STBG funding that is remaining or left over after closeout projects can be applied to studies. We will then come back with some options as to how exactly you want to deal with that, and we'll show you some options in January, and then you can all decide what you think is feasible and not feasible.
All right, does anybody have any issues with number A? Or let's just pull the bird.
So let me just ask a question. So for this call for projects, are we saying that we're just kind of, studies are not going to be part of that? We're just going to kind of set studies aside, and the 5 applications localities get, the 3 that transit get, don't go for studies at this point in time, we're gonna try to create a set aside in January or at some point in the future, and that will be kind of where the study prioritization process happens?
That's why I say we're not even there. I would say, because they're gonna have to figure that out, because for me, my suggestion is if I want to apply for a study, I should be able to use it. If I've got a competitive study project, I'm gonna put it into the regular process. But there are gonna be studies that are smaller. Let's say you just want to do a 100-yard sidewalk connection. Let me change that. Maybe 20-yard sidewalk connection. That's not going to score.
I think that's not exactly what Paul's asking, and
Oh, no, I know that's not what he's asking.
Well, the
I'm
thing
saying
is,
how
there's
to
not
move this along.
really that much money, so it'd be better to probably combine it all together and have one pot, and then FEMPA just has to do it once instead of twice.
that, I mean, that is a question. Should we not just throw all the SGGB funding together and everybody just apply, including for studies, and then we allocate it based on scoring? That results in no set aside. And my understanding is that Alex is suggesting we should have a set aside.
Yeah, my only contention with that was if you were going ahead and supply your application for a study now, well, the studies theoretically would have to take part in FY28 or FY29. And I think it's very hard to think that far into the future, that this is the study I'm going to start conducting 5 years into the future, where you're probably going to know that, hey, FY27, I'm going to know I'm going to start a study in FY28. Well, now we already got that FY28 set aside. You can apply for it in FY27 and get that funding and start it then.
And the way to fix that is to take any leftover and remainder funds that are available now in STBG and allocate it in the next financial year, so that it will allocate it in March, April, because it's remainder funds that can be used now. In fact, we have to use it in the next year because VDOT has rules about money that lays around for too long. So it's not going to, the remainder and leftover is not going to be available in FY28. It's going to be available now in, say, FY24.
We also have rules in our approved CMAQ STBG methodology regarding extra money that comes in, and that it should go towards existing project needs first.
That's why I'm saying that's why we're having this discussion, because it would be a departure from that. It would be saying we'd set aside it for studies rather than roadway projects.
So
but as you can see, it's not large amounts of money.
So if we do that though, shouldn't we cap it? I mean, what if like?
Yes, we should cap
Ends up
it.
being like $2 million comes in. We have to
Yes.
put all that to study.
Correct. Yes, we should cap it. We're not going to have a big amount of money, I don't think, this time. But yes, we should have in the policy some sort of a cap.
To be determined at a different meeting, we're not going to be.
Not today. We'll bring you some suggestions in January. Or you can send us an email with some suggestions. We're happy to,
What flavor of money is the 1.2 million for DRPT project? Is that
We believe
STP?
that is CMAQ, but we can't confirm that because DRPT are not here
Okay.
and Susan from VDOT is not here, so we don't actually know.
That's not the Leland money.
I believe that's the station CMAQ money, which was removed when the 5307 was put there, but no one's confirming that. So I don't know for a fact.
Okay.
So just to clarify, are you asking this group, are we asking the group to just deal with current year's dollars, not the future year's dollars? Like when I say current, anytime before FY28.
I'm asking, do you want us to come with proposals for a set aside for studies or not? And we will bring proposals in January based on any comments and input you send us before then.
Yes.
I think conceptually it's a good idea.
So,
Just for the call for projects right now, you can still put in for a study or?
Yes.
Study?
yeah,
Yes.
just for study.
You can still put in for studies. I mean, to give a quick example, one of the things that's going to happen is we've been asked by 2 localities to investigate whether another river crossing would be feasible. Tampa can't do engineering. Tampa can't do detailed economic analysis. So if you want engineering and economic analysis, we're going to have to get funding to hire a consultant to do the engineering and the economic analysis. And we don't have any money anywhere to allocate to that. So either the localities have to pay for it themselves, or they have to apply for that as a project or, I don't know, some level of initial PE study or something. It has to be scored. You have to have funding to allocate to it. That's one example. I know that Stafford has that, was it the 610 study that's underfunded?
Yes.
You want to appoint a consultant, so you've got to top it up. So you've got to get additional funding for the study. Other localities may have other studies. In fact, I think Fredericksburg is thinking about some studies. Don't know whether they're going to apply or not, but localities are thinking about studies. We're going to need to find money to fund them.
I can just emphasize the differences between those two. The in terms of 610 study would be an existing project.
Correct.
So that would be an existing that gets funded over new projects first.
Right, but again, that's why we have to go back to this group, because you may have an existing project, not saying this project that stinks terribly and should have scored anyway, versus a project that got discussed to say, well, you got yours in and we didn't. So that's part of that process of, do we fund the existing project that scored X amount, or do we allow everybody to come back into the process, which may not be beneficial, especially if y'all already have money applied. So that means it goes back to the scoring criteria.
So I'm not technically a member of the TAC, so I can't put resolutions or proposals. So I'm suggesting that what you all do is to decide that you want us to investigate and come with a proposal to have a set aside, and we bring you that proposal in January. And secondly, that you continue with your current application, and should you need funding for a study, you put in your application with your 5 projects for a study. And it's actually 10, because it's 5 CMAC and 5 SDGB, so you've got 10 slots. So if you want to study now, put in an application for a study. We can then deal in January with how much money we've got, and February and so on, and we can bring you a proposal in January. So that's my proposal.
And if you have recommendations for a proposal or what they should include, please provide that to staff. Tony.
Correct. So yes or no, you want a set aside for studies, and do not let that detract from if you would like to apply in this round for studies, because we still have a way to allocate funding for studies currently through the regular SDGB. It's in the policy.
All right. Does anybody have any further questions? So we're just asking them to evaluate options for the next meeting about a set aside. We're not taking an action on whether it'll actually occur or not. So they'll give us proposals of what it looks like. If we need to go another round of meetings to figure out how to get there, and we meet in February again, let's meet until we get this right. So anybody opposed to moving forward? And that's okay if you're opposed to evaluating set aside options. Anybody opposed? This is going to be consensus, not a vote. All right. So staff, please proceed with evaluating options for set aside. TAC staff that are interested, please provide any recommendations on what that could potentially look like.
Correct. Thank you.
All right. Looks like we are on to item E.
So we have presentations from our consultant on the East-West study. Coming out of the stakeholder group, and also various emails I've got since the report was published, there are 2 things I think we should bear in mind as they're setting up. The first one is some of these projects are really big. Some of them ring alarm bells. And some of you have said we need to have a policy discussion about what we should be doing long term with our congestion issues and our accessibility issues. I agree with that. Remember, our consultant can't have a policy discussion for us, right? PAMPO has to have a policy discussion. The consultant can adjust their projects. We don't like them. What they can't do is tell us what our policy should be. They have some ideas, I'm sure, that they could share. But let's not force the consultant into our internal policy discussion. But I'm happy for us to have that policy discussion.
Great. So with that, we'll summarize a little bit the report and the discussion that we had last week with the stakeholder group, where Ian was starting to talk about some of the places we've begun to evolve the roadway report based on that conversation. Try to be efficient in the summary to allow time for discussion, and also to generally comport with our goal to work through in this meeting today. But I think most folks and a number of people were part of the stakeholder conversation last week. We are looking in the roadway report at really 3 things. Looking at capacity enhancing projects along the corridors that the model shows us in 2050, even after all other projects continue to have congestion challenges. looking at particular interchanges that have been proposed along I-95, and looking at certain pedestrian and bicycle projects. And those are grouped between the roadway report and the transit report based on where their nexus is, whether it's a general roadway project or whether it's about access to transit. And so as folks may recall, basically the priority that we've had within the study is to look at the areas where we have that severe congestion in 2050, even after the projects in the constrained long-range plan. Those are the corridors here, and this numbering is how it was set up in the phase 1 study done by FAMPA. So we then analyzed the corridors. We started with trying to validate the model, look at seeing in particular what that found, lots of little places where projects that were in the constrained long-range plan were totally represented. Look at those models, identify potential projects, analyze how those projects perform on this capacity metric. How did it do in terms of moving vehicles throughout the region? How does that relate to cost and constructability, which we'll talk about more. A key factor, severe congestion, that's starting at 0.89 of volume, how many vehicles are trying to move versus capacity, where extreme is another metric we've used, which is where we get above 1. So we try to look at the system before it gets all the way at capacity, and when the system is totally at capacity, that's when we're going to see larger queues, more backup, more challenges in the transportation. Look at that. And so basically within the 13 corridors, we identified really the peak volume over capacity ratio. Where did we see the sort of this concentrated segment of high congestion during peak periods? You can see what are highlighted are the places where within that sort of logical segment that VC went above 1. There's still some smaller segments in some of these other corridors where you see that severe level or extreme level of congestion. But these are the ones where we saw some severe levels of congestion in 2050 after everything else is built. There are some flags last week about some of the numbers. We're still looking to make sure that all of the AADT numbers there line up. So that's something we'll be coordinating in the refinement of the report. So some of the key findings and one flag that really came out of the conversation last week, building towards that policy conversation. So where we see congestion highest within the model is where we have a lot of auto-oriented commercial activity tying into where I-95 activity is, which means the east-west and the north-south are really bleeding together in terms of what we see in the region. And the congestion on some of these already pretty wide in the model arterials means we need to be thinking about things like parallel routes, access management, how we develop a larger grid of streets. We think that there are some recommendations we've identified that help do that, but that a lot of that will come down to more, corridor specific, operation specific, and sort of local policy specific ways to try to fill in the missing teeth in terms of the roadway network there. And one of the things that I think folks really prioritize is this study looks at capacity enhancing improvements. There was a good conversation last week with the stakeholder group about sort of this tells a story of when you get to 2050, as envisioned in the land use, as envisioned in the projects, what are you left with? And if you're trying to solve those problems with, capacity enhancement, what are some of the ideas you could put on the table? That isn't the only realm and we've updated the report since last week to talk a little bit more to what I think people last week called the sort of plan B, which is the sets of policy issues to think through to see if you can reduce volumes or reduce the severity of those volumes on the network in order to minimize the need to have a large 2050 capital program and then large capital projects on top of that. So we have the corridors that we studied, and that those basically fall into a bucket of places where we're trying to provide some new connections, where we're looking at widening along the roads, and whether that happens, in a major substantial road that's all, major arterial that's getting further widened, or maybe more of a secondary road in the larger network, but that provides a sort of workaround capacity to help move vehicles in the future. And so we'll talk through those a little bit, but basically the summary of some of the regional projects, those are the basically large projects that pose lots of regional questions. And I'll note we've updated a little bit. There was a lot of questions last week about the cost estimates. And so we flagged right now, but we'll be working to further update the cost estimates. That what you'll see in terms of the hard numbers or the hard construction cost in $22. We'll be working to further update soft costs and other, sort of rounding out the property sets of issues that relate to a lot of these projects. So when we're looking at the regional projects, we're looking at projects where we think that they can have an impact on congestion more broadly. And these are definitely projects that have been the conversation in the region in the past. And we think that the sort of framing of the study, as in you get to 2050, you've done everything else. What is left is why, these relatively big projects sort of emerge back out. Particularly when we're talking in a regional model, we can't necessarily get into all of the fine-grained operational approaches or travel demand approaches that you might take, on the traffic operations or on a planning level. So what we found, the first regional project was this new western network of a widened truss flow, providing connections between Enon and Centerport, and then Centerport up to Courthouse. We'll flag here, this shows it over near Austin Ridge, but I think the general consistency with local plans is to head over to Mine Road. So we would update that for the draft report going to the policy committee. So the benefit here, some benefits in regional congestion travel, but it does have large, costs and impacts working this route through. We think this provides, sort of that a new western network, the idea of being provide some options that for local traffic in a, arterial but local road that keeps people off 95.
Just before you leave that slide, a question to Chris. In your experience doing this for decades, is 10% drop in regional congestion, is that a significant amount? I mean, just in terms of order of magnitude, is 2% significant? Is 10% significant? Is 50% significant? What do you typically see as a significant change when you work on projects like this in other areas of the country?
I think what you were related to is return on investment.
Sorry.
I think what you really want to do is related to your return on investment. So you want to look at that cost and compare that to production. So I wouldn't say an absolute value, but it's that next step, that engineering process, which,
okay,
as you know, is coming. That's when we could really tell you what the true benefit is.
Okay.
So just real quick question, because I wasn't smart enough to ask the question at the East-West study meeting. It came to me too late, but is the change in regional congested travel indicated here, reduced by 10% because there's just more new roadways that won't be congested? So like, in other words, the same roadways that are congested today will be congested in 2050, but you've just got other roadways that are like, LOS-A or something like that? Or is it that there are actually places where it's LOS-F projected that will be LOS-C or D or something like that?
Yeah, so this number is a melding of sort of two things. One, basically, what will the average person experience?
Okay.
As well as then within the system, sort of I'm not quite sure if there's basically how much congestion does the system as a whole experience? So right, there are still corridors that don't benefit much from this. What we show is that when you put all the projects together, a bunch of corridors see benefits, and then you see this about 20% regional overall drop in what, on average people would experience.
Because I woid say, and this is obviously higher level than what this study was meant to do, but that's a policy question. What's the expectation of the citizen in 2050? Is it that they on average will experience less congestion, or that very specific areas of the region will experience a significant drop in congestion? So I'm not saying to answer that, that's just something that we need to be considerate of.
Yeah. And I think that plus what Chris was flagging about the
That's a question.
Oh, I apologize.
Do you want to wait till the end, or how do you?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is it wait for the end or now? Question.
That's chair.
All right. Let's go ahead and ask the questions now, but we'll try to keep it moving because we're getting a little tight on time.
Now, my question is, I'm assuming that you're doing this study for existing road and corridors or also future corridors.
So
let me finish my question here. And also, when you do this study, I mean, 2050, that's a long way, future, but the question is, when you come up with recommendation, do you pass this to localities to consider it right-of-ways so they can plan on acquisition or, reserving?
Yeah, so
Explain that to us.
yes, we are basically, the model looks at the future road network as envisioned for 2050. So in terms of new connections, widenings, that's sort of programmed in terms of our base for 2050. In terms of the second part, that's part of the idea of the report. If the localities see this report and see benefits in terms of starting to think through, okay, how can we, where we aren't already thinking about acquiring or preserving right of way, how can we use this to, update plans and approaches in some of these corridors? So I know that, for example, in this one, there's been a lot of thinking about how to start, filling this piece in. Some of that may already sort of be underway, but yes, that would be an idea that if the localities think that these reports, that some of these projects make sense, to incorporate them into local planning documents and estimates.
Good.
So then we studied, as Ian sort of alluded to earlier in the meeting, we've looked at potential river crossing. This is, as I will always emphasize, the sort of shortest point that we could draw. We looked at this, even though it's obviously a big topic, because of its ability to sort of fill in from that western network in terms of continuing local access on the west side. No determination about actual alignment here, just how we can model the sort of closest point A and point B. We see some regional reduction in congestion and extreme congestion. We raise lots of questions about cost, alignment, overall policy, regional questions, but we do see some benefits to the region. We studied that independently with a new interchange at milepost 131 to provide access in here and to provide some workarounds from the south and from the north. And that alone, we don't see any sort of large changes in regional travel. We see some benefits in some of the congested corridors and some of the ones that are lower on the overall congestion score. When we bring those together, we do see benefits to regional congestion, particularly to the areas of extreme congestion. And then some of the corridors sort of to the north and to the south see some benefits. Route 3, as well flagged, continues to sort of have a lot of challenges, even when a lot of these projects. And then the last regional project we looked at, consistent with the scope to look at the interchanges, is Harrison Road. So the model already assumes a widening of Harrison Road, and then the benefits of an interchange. It does seem to have some benefits to regional congestion. Obviously, it has costs and property considerations and overall planning in terms of looking at new interchanges on I-95. It is the thing that we saw having most benefit for Route 3, but Route 3 will continue to have sort of traffic operation challenges that will need to be addressed through corridor-specific operation projects. So those were the big regional projects we looked at. Then we looked at a series of corridor projects, and that looked at, and I'll move through quickly here, just with Chair's direction. Looked at widening Courthouse, Stafford. Looked at some focused widening in Warrenton approaching 95. Looked at a pretty large scale widening on the west end of Garrisonville Road. You can see here we're focused on the corridor congestion changes. Mountain View, we have some congestion approaching Shelton Shop, so this looks at a short widening approaching that intersection. Cowan, we look at widening to 6 lanes along the corridor. That is not as congested an intersection, a road, and there's a lot of question about the impacts of such a widening. So because it's sort of more marginal, there's likely more focused improvements that could get you pretty large benefits and reduce some of the impacts there. And then US 17 approaching Spotsylvania, we have some congestion here. And we're able to, by a widening, improve the congestion pretty well, but there's some discussion about how we address the full corridor. So then the sort of key final piece of the report is looking at prioritization. As I mentioned, one of the things that we've now flagged in the prioritization section of the report is talking about, this sort of logic of you get to 2050, you have this congestion, you have these sets of potential projects that have some regional benefit. We'll show the sort of full compendium. That's sort of plan A. There's a whole set of policy questions that the stakeholder group and many of you here raised that we think as planners are worth talking about. How do you deal with the land use connections off these major roads, travel demand and mode shift strategies to not end up in this place? If you pursue these roadway projects, the bundles we've looked at are this Western network, which we think helps provide some alternatives on the western side. The river crossing and interstate access, really the one on the north, combined have large regional benefit, raise large regional questions. And if you take those projects together, those 5 together, you do see the sort of regional benefit of around 20%. And a lot of the tricky roads that were the focus of our study do see reductions in congestion, at least in the model in 2050. Some of the arterial widenings we sort of have flagged separately. Those carry, as folks mentioned, lots of property implications and that balance of economic development along the corridor against the need to try to have regional mobility on those corridors. So these arterials see more sort of larger regional benefit than some of the Mountain View and Cowan, which is more focused and localized on roads that aren't as significant in terms of their congestion. And then, Harrison as an interchange performs less well from an overall regional standpoint when the milepost 131 interchange is combined, but, obviously has some benefits, particularly to Route. So the sort of considerations part, Route 3 is going to need more traffic operation consideration, the input from the study. The Western network, there are a couple of different routes to consider, particularly Plantation Road's been something popular as an alternative to what we've shown here. It could certainly basically be the recommendation. And then again, flagging the conversation we had last time of this is one flow of the future. There's a whole nother set of things the region can do to try to minimize the capital outlay and sort of transform the way people move in the region. So that's the roadway piece of the puzzle. I'll just highlight very quickly, basically we have head bike around the town center, looking along Carl Silver, potential alternative through the to be developed parcel here. But basically on the west side, transitioning to the east side, making use of, trying to be consistent with the sector plan and making use of probably some of the parking areas, which the sector plan also calls for rationalizing the overall amount of parking, but this would definitely be an impact that would need to be considered. And then we propose, providing connection over on Chatham on the south side of Kings Highway, providing dedicated pedestrian bicycle infrastructure, and then look at a road reconfiguration along Chatham to provide pedestrian, actually protected bicycle infrastructure on either side. Chatham meets the AADTs for doing a road reconfiguration, as in there isn't excessive traffic to consider it, but because of the implications for access for both residential and commercial users, definitely something that would need to be considered in a local policy and political way. But in terms of trying to, create something transformative, which we were tasked to do, in terms of getting out from the core of the city, this seemed like an attractive option for some dedicated infrastructure. So basically, we're taking feedback before we go before the policy committee at the end of the month. This is the draft report. The draft report will receive public feedback and then, and all of this feedback together to inform the final report. As I mentioned, we've tried to incorporate already feedback from the stakeholder group and many folks gathered here in terms of the overall framing and direction. But we welcome, continued feedback right now and, really over the next week so that we can revise and refine what goes before the policy committee at the end of the month. Justin.
All right, any questions? All right, Paul.
Madam Chair, I have a couple comments. With regards to Route 208 in Spotsylvania, we have a desire for a crosswalk, basically at the 4 Mile Fork shopping center. It's a little more involved crosswalk than usual. And I'll say we did check with VDOT. They don't have a way to fund it in the near future, and it slipped through the cracks of some existing smart scale projects in that area. We would like, if possible, for that to be added as kind of a bike ped and recommendation for the study. Also just wanted to talk a little bit about US 17 Mills Drive in Spotsylvania. So our comp plan has it being widened 4 lanes, basically the current terminus of the project VDOT's doing in Hospital Boulevard all the way to New Coast. And I said there's a lot of development basically going off of that with Alexander's Crossing to the south. The Spotsylvania Regional Hospital is talking about a major expansion there. There's some other smaller developments there. There are a bunch of some major industrial warehousing developments off of Cosner Drive. So the county is planning to widen it basically from the terminus of the VDOT project going to the east. And it seems like with the east-west study, kind of the piece from Hospital kind of Boulevard to Maspons Church Road is now marked for any kind of improvement, and just the widening is to the east of Maspons Church Road to the VRE lot, which we think is also a priority, but we think that that's not as high of a priority as basically from Hospital Boulevard to Maspons Church Road. And I'm not sure if this point if there's any way to change this, but
So basically the model results showed the worst congestion over on the east side, but what we've put in the report consistent with this comment is basically there's a logic both for the reasons you identified and then overall scoping out because as you know, even today, that cross section has sort of widens out for turn lanes and the like, basically thinking through what's a logical widening of the corridor. So we've tried to basically put and can strengthen in the report this comment that, there's desire in the comment, there's things happening here, even though the model doesn't show congestion in that segment, it would be wise to consider, the full extent as the likely project associated with this widening.
sounds good. Thank you.
Any comments?
I wanted to ask a question. I think I heard you saying Cowan Boulevard would be a 6 lane. Is that
Correct. Yes. That was the
analysis? And is there any study, any road in this study about connection between Cowan and Route 3 called Mahone extension?
So we have the network in there, but in terms of, your recommendation would be to look at.
We had big project coming out, and this is the time to ask for right of way. This is going to be a 6-lane boulevard.
Yeah. Right. No, and so we definitely heard some concern about, 6 laning, particularly through its full extent. So, and I guess the map we have of Cowan isn't great in terms of the full access, but basically in terms of making sure that the sort of the connectivity to Route 3 is really represented and thereby seeing if we can absolve having to have a larger widening.
I think what he's mentioning is that there's a big blank piece of property right there.
Right.
And there's a future road called Gateway Boulevard.
Right.
That turns into Mahone, and it should be in the model.
Yeah, so we'll check if it's not, and I think that's the sort of filling in the network that we can certainly.
Just correct me if I'm wrong, is Gateway Boulevard's new section in the CLRP?
It may not be. It's always been envisioned to be developed privately, which is what's on the table right now. We have a rezoning case right now.
So that may be what happened here. We briefed them to please include all the CLRP projects and see what else would go wrong. So they would have put all the CLRP ones. If it's not in the CLRP, then it's probably not coded in their model because it's not in the CLRP. So, but I couldn't off the top of my head remember if it's.
It's a model. Okay.
It's in the model all the way from 3 to Fall Hill.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're seeing that, but we can also look at how
Please.
Given the concern about Cowan widening, what could we do to make use of that leg a little better?
And there is another facility that's planned in our comp plan which would connect Gateway about midway through that property to Carl D. So another 95 crossing, which would be a preferred alternative, I think, to widening to 6 lanes.
Got it. Understood.
That is not in the CLRP, but
Okay.
that's getting your comp plan.
Yes, ma'am.
That's great.
Okay, thank you.
That could really help.
All right, any other comments or questions on this element? All right, we can go to the next one.
If you're not sick of me yet. All right, so on the transit report, we're going to focus in on, thanks so much, on the areas that we've refined. This was really based on feedback from the policy committee and coordination with staff on some of the pedestrian bicycle connections in particular. So on the east-west high-capacity transit route, we shared a draft transit report that had a recommendation in terms of that corridor. We have focused the corridor based on the feedback we received from the policy committee between Spotsylvania Town Center and the Fredericksburg VRE station. As we talked about last week, for those who were there, the way to think about this is this beginning spine working through our different activity centers. Fredericksburg Go will think through what could connect off in, tie into this. And we are looking at priority transit features. I'll talk about one that we've received some feedback on, whether it'll be retained. Exactly where we terminate at the town center is something still to be determined. Whenever we're closing a bus location, particularly a turnaround in a shopping and redeveloping area, there's a lot of things to think through in terms of specific alignment. But basically what the final transit report recommends, starting at town center, focused on probably on the east side and its terminus where the redevelopment is happening, work its way across, go across town, hit the hospital, come through the heart of Fredericksburg, conclude at the VRE station. So we think that sort of major activity centers and generators are captured here. There's some discussion in the stakeholder group of the value of the deviation to the hospital versus a more direct route. We had found that did, drive some ridership, but certainly something that could continue to be refined as this project advances. Alongside that, we are trying to look at some priority features. Some things that would be fundamental everywhere where you see a little bus, those stations would be enhanced stations. They would provide level boarding if possible, provide real-time information, and generally increase the visibility of transit in the community. We look at a couple of places where we think it's important to try to get the bus through. There's some questions about Route 3 in terms of trying to do TSP across here. Can we achieve that without creating any further impedance? On the east-west movement on Route 3, something we've heard from VDOT, and we'll evaluate and take a look at whether this one can stick around. And then how to structure a queue jump that doesn't cause, inordinate property impacts at that intersection. We've seen some queue jumps that make use of existing right turn lanes, and thereby, they create a little bit of friction, but they reduce the property impact. And we've revised the report to give some credence to that, given the comment that we heard. Downtown Stafford Transit Center, notwithstanding all of the planning conversations about downtown Stafford, we're still advancing a recommendation that gives flexibility for a range of choices. And that recommendation is to make, appropriate upgrades to meet the different types of feature demands in the general vicinity of the existing park and ride. That provides access for regional bus, commuter bus, both to the north and to the south in the future. Provides potential terminus and staging area for local buses coming in. And if you complement that with bus stops within the future development, you can get the access you're looking for while also having the flexibility for future planning by being in this existing location should, whatever the future of the town center development will be and what its timing will be. And then on the ped bike recommendations, we were basically looking at two focus areas: getting the Spotsylvania VRE station along the Benchmark Road corridor, and then also to the west towards Germanic College, and then accessing the Brook VRE station. There's some updates to flag to both. One not fully represented yet, and the second we have gotten alignment on a northern portion of the alignment on the Brook Road based on feedback from elected officials and staff. So I'll speak through those quickly. So in terms of connecting to VRE, we have the Benchmark Road corridor from the north to Spotsylvania. We are trying to get our way underneath, going straight right along the rail corridor. There's definitely things we'll need to look at in terms of whether we can make this work. And the county has made clear that if that can't be achieved, continuing on Benchmark is a recommendation, and we will clarify that in the report. And this Eagle Drive connection is really just a way for those who want to continue to the west along Mills Drive, US 17, and then sort of coming along Overview Drive, to Germanic College. We have that access in, but as mentioned, we'll look at how exactly we can get into the VRE station further in the next phase. This shows some of the cross section as we move from Mills to Overview. And then in terms of brook access, we got basically feedback on an alignment, which we think we have largely matched here in terms of the north section, really working through the backside of redevelopments and some easements that have already been identified for trail as well as for sewer easements. So we'll basically follow that as we head toward the Civil War Park. And then from Civil War Park, as recommended, we have going along Mount Hill Church Road and coming into the Brook Road station. So those are the recommendations in terms of the ped bike access to the VRE stations. Basically the final transit report, that transit recommendation, as well as those connections. The goal there is to get that at the end of the month to the policy committee for final approval versus the roadway, which is going out for public comment. So if there are any final cleanup comments, we welcome that, but we are generally trying to achieve approval of that at the end of the month.
Any comments or questions for the group? Now is the time. Anything that you're in particular elected would have an issue with or concern?
The 4 comments that we did get, the consultant has changed in the transit report. So the alignment of the Stafford bike path is shown you has changed. The slightly reducing the scale of the transit transfer center at Stafford has been implemented in the report in the final version. We have reduced the route of the high capacity transit by removing the Route 3 sections altogether, and the associated costs with those been removed altogether. It does substantially reduce the cost of construction. And the only comment about the routes to the Spotsylvania station are just the alignment around those bridges and tunnels, which the consultant will finalize in the engineering phase when they take a final look at those widths and distances and gap underneath the bridge and all that kind of thing. So as far as from a staff level, we think that we've answered those questions. If there are any other things, please do tell us. We would like to get the policy committee to endorse the transit report at its next meeting. The roadway report is in process. There's still got to be public comment. We still want your inputs on the roadway report. Some details, please send those details.
What do you need from us on the transit report?
We're asking you to just endorse the resolution to adopt the transit report.
Make a motion that we endorse the resolution to adopt the transit report.
Second. Thank you. Any discussion? I will be at the table meeting. Y'all discuss now. I'm gonna say you didn't say no.
Go, Jamie.
Snitching. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? I was having for being a blessing on this day. All right, thank you for both of you for sticking around and the report.
Item H, we also need you to endorse directing a public comment period for the roadway report. And I have a second request that if there are any of the roadway projects that you think are likely to get support by the jurisdiction, tell us which ones those are, because we can then ask the policy committee to instruct the consultant to start some engineering work. So those 2 things I'm asking. The first one is, would you support us putting it out for public comment? And secondly, have you identified any of those 15, I think there are roadway projects and bike path projects in the roadway report that you've policy to endorse for further study? And further study means starting to do the drawings, starting to do detailed cost estimates, starting to do all that other stuff that would prepare it for a funding application. They're 2 different questions.
Okay, let's do the resolution first, and then let's talk about the details right after.
Motion to approve.
All right, let's approve resolution 2308. Can I get a second, please? Resolution 2308.
Second.
All right, second. All those, any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, Paul.
So just a question, like with the roadway improvements, do you want us, I'll say, how many do you want us to select? And do you want us to prioritize them?
I'll answer that very easily. The cap is 7. We can't ask them to engineer and do detailed cost estimates and so on more than 7 projects. So the cap is 7. However, I don't think we would be in a position right now to be able to identify all 7 and say those are the 7. I think my gut feel is there's some questions people are asking, like the Garrisonville Road, where the proposal is for 8 lanes, and there's a question about how much condemned property is going to be impacted. We can't decide to do that right now, for example. So I'm suggesting if you can pick 3 or maybe 4 now that they can continue to work on, that would be helpful. But certainly I'm not expecting you to pick 7, because I think you're going to want to bounce it around in your localities and, you know, write comments and say, no, we need to change this aspect or change that. We're only going to public comment now, so I don't expect the full 7. I'm expecting a couple that they can continue to work on over December and January. And the simple reason is that we're not meeting again until January, and the policy committee doesn't meet until like the 3rd week of January, which means that's like 7 or 8 weeks where we can't give them an instruction to continue. So I'm hoping we could guide the policy committee by saying, oh, take these 2 and carry on studying them, or 3, or whatever the number is. If you can identify a couple, that would give the consultants something to continue to work on. They can work on the transit report items if the policy committee adopts it. But are there any roadways that you see in these list of about 15, I think, that you think, you know, number 2 and number 7 they could continue with? I will ask the policy committee, obviously, to approve that, but I'm hoping you have a suggestion.
VDOT has provided a number of comments from stakeholder group. Is wondering what kind of schedule you have for responding to those. And do you think that those will make their way into the report within the next 2 weeks before the policy committee sees its presentation?
Absolutely. So we got those comments this morning. I've sent them already to the consultants. In terms of timeline, I mean, some of those things are policy issues, which I can't ask them to answer for us, but some of them are like in the transit, the items in the transit report, I think they've just answered. So in the roadway report, were there any, what do you think about a timeline for responding to VDOT's comments?
I think we'll try it. So I think we've already given some
Yes.
engagement in the latest version, but I think some things, basically in the version that goes before the policy committee, we will try to respond. We will seek to respond to those comments, the issues that they raised and the conversation we had over the last today.
The big policy question can't be answered, I don't think, in the report itself, because that's a question of if this is what it's going to look like in 2050, is widening every road the answer? And you're suggesting, and I think rightly so, that answer might be doing a range of 5 other things, and that's the thing that I'm really glad about. I think some of you were shocked at each other getting worked up about this report in the stakeholder group. I wasn't at all, because that's the exact conversation FAMPO needs to have long term is, are we going to keep widening every road, or are there some other things we can do? And one of the things I think they've proposed is you need to work on your grid, because you've got too few roads having to carry all the traffic and the grid is not working. And I think that comes clearly out of this study, is that the total grid has got teeth missing. What do we do about that? I'm not saying what the answer should be. I'm just saying that is a valid question. And I think VDOT's comments are valid and they feed into that conversation that happened at the stakeholder group. So that question, I don't think they're going to answer. But the other questions of a technical nature, I think they will be able to answer for the policy meeting.
I think it was kind of answered. Just consideration of the comments from last meeting.
Yeah, so I think we've already tried to get
some of the text has already changed.
Yeah, the pros and cons and such.
So, quick question for staff. I know y'all, we're going to give you the information, but when do you need it by from us as far as the rankings for the comments on the location?
So all 7 I don't need before Christmas. We can do that in January. But if you can see maybe 2 or 3 now that are obvious places to start, I'd like to hear those now, because what I'm going to do is say to the policy committee, how about these 3, whatever the number is, 2. And if they are happy and you are happy, the consultant can start to work on those, even though we know that we have to wait for public comment before we can adopt the report.
For Gateway Boulevard from Route 3 to Fall Hill, do we need to submit something?
So Gateway Boulevard is not under study in
I
this.
thought it was, wasn't it?
No,
No, that's in your long-range plan already. Yeah.
it is in the CLRP, but they were not asked to study the Gateway Boulevard because that's a north-south road. This is an east-west study. So we try to steer away from north-south roads. They have proposed 2 new pieces of infrastructure that are north-south, but that's a solution they proposed. We never asked them to study those. They've brought them to us as solutions to our east-west problem.
I think to the city's question, I think what we can do is speak to how that could serve as, and how thinking about that and potential other connectors could serve as an alternative, a complement to that. So if there's more feedback you want to provide on those connectors themselves, that would be.
And I'll just ask this, if y'all don't want this, please, not let me dictate, even though I'm in the chair seat. Can staff give us a quick survey monkey just with those options and then just have the localities respond to that as a tickler, maybe whatever? Because I want something, because I'm gonna assume that somebody's gonna forget around this table.
So for January, we can do Survey Monkey, yes.
Yes, that would be great. That way you get the comments from each jurisdiction and we have our top 3 and you have to think about that.
I think this road we're talking about, it could be a relief for Cowan Boulevard being 6 lane, because you have a lot of constraint on Cowan Boulevard to go ahead and, take more areas from existing.
That's a very good point.
So
that's a very good point. Alex, is there any road in Stafford that you think they can carry on working on, or do we need to wait until there's been more consultation?
I think from staff's perspective for Stafford County, looking at that western corridor with the mine road extended down to Centerport. However, would suggest rather than connecting up to Truslow and bringing that out to Route 1 to look at making the connection with Plantation Boulevard and taking that out to US 17. I know we have some time, size constraints with Truslow, the recently reconstructed bridge. We really wouldn't facilitate a 4-lane facility there. So if you could look at that, I think Stafford County be confident moving forward with that.
Is that a cluster of 3 roads?
Yes. Yes.
So that's 3 already.
Well,
Paul, anything from Spotsy that you think is likely to be useful?
Can't tell you right now. Our transition committee is meeting on Thursday, wanted to run it by them.
Sure.
We'll follow up after that.
Okay, we can do that. And the city, I don't know who, Bassam and Mike, anything from the city that you would like them to carry on working on that you think has merit? Some things I know are big projects that, we're going to meet after this to talk about the bridge, but
Let us get our comments together too, similar to Paul, and I will let you know.
Thanks.
End of this week, early next week.
Thank you very much.
All right.
I think we're done with that.
Okay, letter to appointee, letter 9.
So we just went ahead and drafted a rough letter, because, when, okay, you do it. Sorry, you do it.
So yeah, this is, as Ian said, we've drafted a letter to OIB regarding a discrepancy in the way our smart scale applications are being evaluated from what is in the technical guide. And I don't know if any, you're shaking your head yes, so maybe you too. So our regional applications and Spotsylvania have both run into the problem of what's in the technical guide on economic development sites versus what the central reviewer is doing. And I see you've already got your hand up, Matthew. Are you running into this problem?
I have a question.
What's your question?
Have you guys looked into, asked VDOT or OIP how it was done last year to get confirmation that it's different than last year?
It doesn't matter. What matters is it's different to the handbook.
In the grand scheme of things, it matters a little bit, but yeah. I just remember seeing on the map, like when you drew in the economic development, it drew the red line, the dot on the road to where the site is versus your project. Like last year when I was doing it. So I just wanted to know if there's a difference or not.
Steven.
Yeah, just a single comment about what the technical guide does say. So there isn't the term pro, it's not in there.
No,
The word buffer is used. Now, in the 5 rounds that I've been involved in Smart Scale, all of our projects have been certain projects. We haven't done any air project. And I'm not saying that to be flippant. I mean, the logic says that if you're looking at distances, you're following something that you can actually travel. If you're improving a roadway, you're trying to address a roadway need that exists. And so I think, while I understand there's an issue with this and it needs to be clearly defined. And this is a lesson learned that we should have already incorporated. I agree with that. And I say I'm talking about my friends in OIP. We do need to come to a conclusion on that, but I don't know that we could go as far as saying that the current technical guide implies anything about a direct line distance. I don't think that's there.
So the original request came from, I think, Paul. So maybe Paul, if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, it came from Spotsylvania, myself being one of them. What I would say is basically in the prior rounds, basically we did a straight line buffer, which, I think was like 22 or 3 miles. We never had an issue with basically people saying like, using that as the crow flies distance, you should use the driving distance. We had, I would say, dozens of economic development cases, which we had on our local projects. We'd also given basically to FAMPO and GWC, and they had to basically take them out. And it was like a lot of make work project. And if we had known that up front, we wouldn't have had that. And it's not work just for Spotsylvania and FAMPO staff, but also I'll say at the residency, Carolyn Oster and her staff had to spend all this time going out. They had to send out inspectors to look at things. I mean, just was a big make work project. And so I guess with the city and Stafford and King George and Caroline, did they have any of these issues?
Yeah, it was very similar. Expecting the buffer to be a buffer and then seeing the line draw on the road. It was a very similar experience, and we had projects that dropped out as a result of that.
The question is that what do you call the handbook? The technical guide actually needs to spell out what it wants so that everybody's not disadvantaged and everybody can prepare additional economic development documents to support what the actual line drawing is going to look like. The problem is it doesn't, and now they're applying a certain logic, which, I'm assuming they're applying the same logic to everybody, but it does leave localities at a disadvantage because you couldn't prepare the correct stuff.
What you're saying is exactly right. The important thing is the consistency statewide so that everyone's competing at the same level. I absolutely share Paul's frustration with this because our staff spent a whole lot of time just like theirs did. We want the answer to this as well. I don't know that, again, as far as this round, the idea is that it's being applied consistently statewide so that it's apples to apples. That's our understanding. So, and then again, that is exactly the conversation we had with OIP and with Carolyn, who did the bulk of the work in the Fampo area here. So, yeah, I don't know as far as your letter to your secretary or whatever. I don't know that that's I would be careful to make sure that at least what's in it is accurate and, as far as what the technical guide says, and certainly to encourage them to, make some sort of determination what we're going to do from here forward. Yeah, and again, yes, Ms. Oster at the land use engineer in the residency had a lot correspondence with them over this very subject. And so again, it's something we have information on, and I will seek from her the exact guidance that she received. A lot of it, and again, this is another problem we have with our friends at OIP. A lot of their instructions are given verbally. They don't give a lot of written instructions. I think that the technical guide. So again,
to save time here, we produced a draft letter in response to the fact that it was requested, and we thought, like, if we don't produce a draft letter, we're going to have a lot of back and forth, and what should we say, and should we? So there's a draft letter. If you don't want to send it as the TAC, that's your decision. If you do want to send it, but you want to amend the wording, that's also your decision. We at FAMPO are not all like, hey, we have to have this letter. We were trying to speed up this meeting by giving you a draft so you
So
can,
does anybody have any comments on the letter? And the language of the letter? Does anybody have any issue with us sending out the letter? And Paul, I'm actually gonna start with you since you originated the request for Rodney. Do you have any issue with, TAC sending out this letter? And everybody else is keeping review at the same time?
it's been in your pack, so you have the letter.
Yeah, I'm looking at the letter. I don't have any current issues.
I would just make one suggestion. It was mentioned here that since, yeah, as the crows flies, seem to be, maybe it says it implies utilizing a as the crows flies approach rather than as written, it specifically calls out that approach. I mean, it calls for a buffer approach. I mean, I take that as like, you're utilizing a straight line radius around your project areas to determine impacts for economic areas. Not really, a subrouting through however roads get you there, and which may result in a route perhaps longer than a mile when your straight line buffer is within that mile distance. So maybe just modify that language a little bit to use the implies.
All right, any issue with the language?
No, so with that language change, do you want to send the letter or not? Bearing in mind, you won't send it. The policy committee will decide whether to send it, but we must recommend whether or not they should send it.
So we can get.
Remember, I'm not behind this letter. I'm just drafting a letter to make it quick. I don't think the letter is meant to say, confirm that you're proceeding like that. The letter is meant to say the way you're proceeding is not what the technical guide says, and therefore you've left us in a difficult position. What you need to do is change the technical. So this letter is asking for the practice to match the technical guide. It's not saying confirm that you're doing it a different way. It's saying, yes, we're telling you you're doing it a different way, and that's not what you should do. You should do what's in the technical guide. So I think that's what the intention of the letter is.
Thoughts on that, Michelle?
I understand that they usually have a call for recommendations for updates to the technical guide and Smart Scale 5. It changed.
Well, what we're saying is this central reviewer is using a different methodology than what is in the technical guide right now. It's not about changing the technical guide. They're not following the technical guide. That seems inappropriate.
Because she's just saying that even if we do move forward, this committee may need to be under the understanding that they're probably not going to change anything.
Oh, yeah,
It'll just be.
But we still have to register.
No, I get it, and I agree. I don't disagree, because, what's gonna happen is somebody's 1 point off, and they're gonna say, no, you can't do that. So,
right,
I don't have an issue. And it's, but if you can get any additional details, that would be great. And by the time we get additional details, that information can be shared with the policy committee too, so that they can actually make a decision on whether they want to move forward with sending out that letter. All right, any other comments? Any objections to sending out the letter? Any objections? Okay, so we're going to recommend this go to the policy committee. VDOT is actually just gonna affirm on their end any additional information that may come up during the policy committee meeting. Help the policy committee make an informed decision on whether they want to send it out, even though we're recommending it move forward.
With Alex's amendment.
But yes, the word change.
Thank you.
All right, we're going on to item J, funding for community lot maintenance. Yes,
Madam Chair, take the time, Stephen and I have researched whether there are any alternate funds for commuter lot upgrade or expansion, and there are none. We have confirmed that across the Commonwealth, others have used Smart Scale, Old House Bill 2 funding or local funds. So that, and Mr. Allens reached out to other MPOs who confirmed there are no special commuter lot funding sources, and they rely on prioritizing them as a road project or a project for their prioritization
Any questions or comments on that? I know we've got a few lots that we need to figure out how we plug those into the process based on that. But that's obviously a problem. We already know what they look like.
So Madam Chair, just quickly, the question came in Spotsylvania was just with a number of our lots, they're kind of various states of disrepair, and I guess it was told to us that VDOT had very limited resources to maintain them. Question was, are there other resources to do that? Which sounds like the answer is no. It seems like, given that that's the case, what is needed is just with these lots, there should be greater kind of maintenance funding going into making sure the pavement's not all cracked, making sure that you don't have kind of grass coming up through them, making sure the transit shelter doesn't look terrible. And we have a number of lots like this. I think Stafford has some too. King George might have some of this too, and I know one down in Caroline. That's one of four is not in good shape. And the thought that we had thrown out, I think, a couple meetings ago, was with just the I-95 monies. There's a lot of money going into new transit and TDM. You want a new lot, like there's the new one in kind of Stafford being built off of 17. I mean, it seems like some of that should go into maintaining the existing lots and sprucing them up, but that would help kind of enhance kind of transit and TDM in the future.
Or upgrading lots that are
Right, or upgrading kind of with
zero
multimodal-
facilities. You got to stand in the rain and wait for the bus. That's kind of.
So this means that the locality needs to apply even though it's a VDOT lot for the funding? Okay.
What about the use of like secondary 6-year plan funds? Wouldn't those be eligible for commuter lot maintenance or even maybe possible upgrades?
Can we capture that question in the minutes? Whoever's doing the minutes, I forget who's doing our minutes. Alex's question, John, if you can just get it from Alex.
All right, so the question is related to secondary 6-year fund utilization, if we can use those. So if those can be captured in the minutes, so we can try to follow up on that. Any other items on that piece? We'll send that letter forward to FIFO. Different topic.
The commuter lot funding.
So we know where we are on that, but I would just say localities, if the area thinks, just put that as part of your VDOT discussion moving forward, because we're gonna have to, I know, right, I need to work on my work.
No, it's perfectly clear.
Gotta make it plain for people. All right, correspondence number 8.
You've got these all in your pack, so I'm not sure we need to read through them.
We do not. If anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free to ask, but it's a letter from Adam Lynch representing Friends of the Rappahannock. We're on an east-west mobility study. We've got a letter from Mary Washington regarding the connection of the study as well.
Right.
All right, so we are on to the staff report.
Connor, can you come out from behind the computer? So this is Connor Anderson. He's our latest new staff member, and his first TAC meeting, he had to run everything for you. So well done. And Connor is a GIS technician and a planner. So welcome to Rampo as the newest member.
You passed the test.
Welcome. You are a rare unicorn of GIS and planning talent.
And for the first time since January, I have no full-time vacancies at Rampo.
You are the only one around this table.
We have a vacancy possibly for a part-time intern, but we have no full-time vacancies. Long may it last.
Stay forever.
Done.
Great. All right. Member reports? Any changes to cost estimates? We talked about that earlier. Any notification of new transportation projects by the localities? Are you building something you don't know about? Did you win the lottery? Did you? Because no one won. So you can't build a project with the lottery. Anybody? Anyone want to?
I'll mention, we have our master transportation plan. Our survey is out as of Friday for the transportation plan. Anybody here lives in Stafford, take the survey. It's on all of our social media. So yeah, go ahead and take it. We have I think almost 300 responses so far on our mapping component, so it's going really well.
Can we pretend to live in Stafford?
I mean, I won't know, but
Just Google somebody's house number and put.
I have asked Coley
have an
to,
address, but
I've asked Coley to tweet on Facebook and all that about.
Thank you.
That they are on leave today, so from tomorrow that should.
awesome.
Some other just reports from Stafford County. I think we have provided FAMPO some information on some cost increases we've seen on some of our existing FAMPO projects.
Yes.
And are certainly working now to get our applications in by November 18th for new funding. I also like to make mention, this will be my last FAMPO meeting. I've accepted a position down in Charleston, South Carolina.
Oh, no.
I'll be starting there after the first of the year. So I want to just say it's been a pleasure working with everyone here and looking forward to see what kind of work you guys do in the future to carry on the work we've started.
Told y'all vacancies. Look.
You spoke too soon.
Thank
you. Good luck.
Congratulations, Alex.
No wonder you hired Matthew so quickly.
And your nice atmosphere. I will find you a
Alex, we're gonna miss you terribly.
Yes.
Thank you.
And Stafford needs to think of somebody who can be the new vice chair if it's not gonna be Matthew, because when our lovely current chair steps down in 6 months, Stafford will need to find us a chair. So just bear that in mind.
I do.
Yep.
I just informed you.
It's like gonna be. Y'all.
Yeah. Add another person to the committee.
All right, and motion to adjourn. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
See you later.
For those who think for the bridge meeting, want to take a 5-minute break, we will get some.
Oh, yeah, it's either the Gamecocks or Clemson for sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's fine. Wearing the baby blues.
So my father-in-law graduated from Citadel.
Just take it. Some folks will assume that you just go locate through the same last.
Yeah.